This is Halli Casser-Jayne. I want to welcome my listeners in the United States and around the world. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show is always available online at hallicasserjayne.com. Welcome to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. I am Halli Casser-Jayne. Let's talk. Why won't Donald Trump apologize is just one of the questions beloved and respected relationship expert Harriet Lerner tackles when Harriet joins me today on the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, when she will introduce her brand new book, Why Won't You Apologize? Healing Big Betrayals and Everyday Hurts. Two little words, so difficult for so many of us to say, I'm sorry. The subject of the hour on the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. But before we begin, the Halli Casser-Jayne Show is always available online at hallicasserjayne.com. Harriet Lerner, a Ph.D., is one of our nation's most loved and respected relationship experts. A renowned scholar on the psychology of women and family relationships, she's the author of 12 books, including the New York Times mega-bestseller, The Dance of Anger, which has sold several million copies and been translated into more than 35 foreign editions. Her client list includes the Smithsonian Institute, Hallmark Cards, Chase Manhattan Bank, Harvard University Medical School, and MIT, to name just a few. In her new book, Why Won't You Apologize? Healing Big Betrayals and Everyday Hurts, Ms. Lerner once again delves into our human foibles, offering insight, advice, and compassion, as well as courage and wisdom, a sanity-saving prescription for both the offended and the offender. Let's talk. So, as always, my friend Harriet, it's lovely to have you here, particularly to talk about this pesky little thing called an apology. Oh my God. So Harriet, right? I decided to look up the definition of apology. How do you like that? Because I was surprised. I was surprised to discover two things. The first is the definition itself. An apology is a regretful acknowledgement of an offense or failure, which comes from apology, or via late Latin from Greek, apology is speech in one's own defense. So before I go to the second discovery, I think the definition is interesting, and I think you might think so too. An acknowledgement of failure is required to apologize?
Well, it is an acknowledgement of some kind of insensitivity or injury, and a good apology absolutely means accepting responsibility for our part of the problem without a hint of evasion or excuse-making or blaming. And it's interesting that you went to the dictionary, because in writing the book, I actually never went to the dictionary. So,
yeah.
Of course, we all use the language so differently.
Exactly. Well, you're coming from it,
yeah.
I think, from a different point of view than I probably would come from it. So the second thing that I learned is this, and this really did astonish me. The use of the word apology, and I assume apologizing, is down by nearly 90% since 1800.
The use of the word is down?
Yes, by almost 90%.
Wow.
And there was a slight uptick beginning in 2010. Something's going on here, right?
That actually surprises me, because especially for men, I've seen a change in a more positive direction. That back in the good old days, so to speak, that men were very hesitant to apologize, both in the workplace or in personal relationships, and experienced it as losing something or giving up power or giving the other person a competitive edge. And that actually has changed, and more men see it in a more objective way. That is, the good apologizer, the leader who can apologize, actually gains in respect. So I'm just thinking of a political exception to that.
We're going to discuss.
In general,
yes,
the person
darling,
who can orient toward toward reality, and can accept responsibility and can care about other people's feelings. gains in both self-respect and respect for others. So I don't know how to understand that statistic.
Yeah, interesting though. It's one that I threw out at you. You can go play with that on your time. We're going to talk about that political person in a bit because I do think it's apropos to our conversation. And we're going to talk about men and women and the difference and how they accept apology in a few minutes. But before we go further, I want to talk about you. Would you have a huge fight with somebody or your husband or whatever and went, I think I'm not dealing with this well. I'm going ahead and I'm going to look into this and I'm going to write a book about apology. How did this thing come to pass?
Well, of course, because I'm an apology expert, I always apologize very wisely and well. Actually, with my husband, Steve, I like to apologize for exactly my share, say 47%, never more than that. And I want him to apologize for exactly his share as I calculate it, of course. And of course, we don't always do the same math. So as in most relationships, this can lead downhill because each party is vying for the position of the one who deserves the apology, and they want to get that apology first. I've been interested in apologies for a very long time. And when I say apology, I'm not just talking about saying the words, I'm sorry, because obviously there's a big difference between forgetting to return your friend's Tupperware and a much more serious injury like ignoring your friend at a time of crisis or betraying her in some way. So some apologies are a long-distance run. But actually, I haven't said this out loud, what got me to sit down at the typewriter and start the book was that I received a very sleazy, blame-reversing, relationship-busting apology that was so awful and so hard to shake off that somehow it inspired me. I mean, the good thing was it inspired me to start the writing.
Turned a lemon into something positive. I like that because this book really does. It's just extraordinary. As soon as I got it, I just sat down with this thing and started to read, oh my God, here she goes again. Brilliant observation. And you know, the thing about you that I love so much is that you deliver the answers with such gentleness. Really, you do. And, you know, that makes me want to read it and to learn from it. You know, I don't want it in my face because I am that character that says, you know, as soon as you put something in my face, I fight back. And I think a lot of people are like that. And that has to do with apology too. Let me go further with you on this. Exactly true, right? Eric Siegel wrote a great book years ago called Love Story, turned into a fabulous blockbuster 1970 film starring Ryan O'Neal and Ally McGraw. Iconic tagline from that, my friend, is this: love means never having to say you're sorry. Does love mean never having to say you're sorry?
I can only say, Halli, I mean, I know that line, that it's just such a crazy idea, unless we're saying it in, you know, with irony, because love means exactly the opposite. Love means caring about the other person's feelings, and it means that we're capable, again, of taking responsibility for what we've said or done or not said or done. And it's the words of apology that are part of validating the hurt party's reality, that we say, yes, I get it, I screwed up, I was wrong, your feelings make sense. So it's sort of a crazy thing to say, isn't it? That love means never having to say you're sorry.
I think it's a dangerous thing to say, actually. And yet people glommed onto that in that generation so that it maybe gave them a reason not to, to exonerate themselves from the devilish deed that one might have to do if they're wrong. So the other side of that is apology always necessary?
Well, is it always necessary? I think that it's always a good idea when, in fact, we've operated at the expense of another person. And we do. We're very imperfect human beings, except, of course, for you and I, Halli.
Of course.
And we will always unwittingly hurt others and be hurt by them. And when you can say, I'm sorry, it's really a great gift to the other person. It allows them to feel safe and soothed in the relationship and knowing that we care about them. And I can't imagine, I'm thinking now of myself, not wanting to hear the words, I'm sorry, even if it's a small thing, like, well, this is not always so small, but, waiting for an hour in the doctor's office on the examining table, and the doctor comes in an hour late, and I know it's not the doctor's fault. I know the doctor hasn't been texting his friends or playing video games, and that's why he's late. But even knowing in that example that he's not to blame, there's a little bit of a disconnection in the relationship. It doesn't feel good if he doesn't say something like, I'm sorry that I'm an hour late. My last patient took more time than I expected. So, I feel the apology is very important.
Cleansing even. Fill in the blank for me. Apologizing is important because?
Because we are justice-seeking creatures, and because when we've been hurt or injured, it is human nature to want that to be acknowledged, to want to know that the person can feel empathy and remorse. And, of course, we want to know that they're not going to do it again, because obviously it's a very empty apology. You can say the words with a grand flourish, but it will have no meaning if we're going to repeat the very thing that we're apologizing for. So it has so much meaning, so much meaning.
And if apologizing has so much meaning and is so important, why is it, my friend, that saying I'm sorry may be one of the two hardest words in the English language to speak? I mean, what's the deal there? It is, that just cracks me up. It is very difficult for some of us to be able to say simply, I'm sorry. It's a big deal. What does that say about humanity? What's the deal here?
What it says about humanity is that we are hardwired for defensiveness and blaming. And what we're apologizing for also matters, because, Halli, if it's a very simple thing, like if you invite me to your house and I spill red wine on your carpet. I mean, anybody can very easily say, I am so sorry. It's going to come naturally, and hopefully offer to pay the cleaning bill, etc. But when it's a larger injury, much more difficult to offer an apology, and it's especially difficult when we're being blamed, we're being confronted. An angry or hurt party is saying, we need to talk because of this issue that we're wired for defensiveness. So we don't want to listen. We don't want to listen to complaints, which may indeed be exaggerated, or maybe the person isn't seeing their part in it. But no apology has meaning. This is a very, very important point I want to make, that no apology has meaning if we haven't listened carefully and without defensiveness to the hurt party's anger and pain. And there's no greater gift than that, and there's nothing harder than that. It's very hard to listen to things that we don't want to listen to and we don't think are exactly fair. But that's what it takes to give a real, genuine apology.
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually have that to talk about. I'm going to come back at that, but from a different point of view.
Good.
Because I do think that that's essential, and I'm in the listening business. In fact, we're doing a show in a couple of days with Frank Sesno just on that, not even asking the right questions. I mean, people just don't want to listen anymore. But, I was thinking about when I was a kid and I would do something untoward to my older sister, and my mom would sometimes just step in and she'd insist that I apologize right this minute with that stern tone of voice that, mothers have. And I think my reaction was one of humiliation. It wasn't bad enough that I might have done something stupid or I did it in revenge. Who knows what the reason was why I did what was wrong that needed to be apologized for, but I've already talked about my stubborn nature. So the minute you tell me to do something, I was going to, I was the opposite. But that being, because I'm crazy, but that being said, humiliation does come into that feeling of why maybe we don't wish to apologize.
I'm really glad you're raising this point. I want to stop you because it's just so important.
Sure.
I want to jump in because often the allergy toward apologizing does have to do with how apologies were handled when we were kids. And it can be very shaming when parents they not only insist on an apology, but when the child gives the apology, the parent does not just say, as I would advise all parents to say, thank you for the apology. Instead, the parent may say, that didn't sound sincere, and I want you to think more about your brother's feelings, and next time maybe you can apologize without my asking for it. And there's so many add-ons that the parent gives rather than just saying, thank you for the apology. That the kid, I speak to when I research this with children, they just want to put their fingers in their ears and run away because the parent overdoing it or pushing it too much is shaming, and it's very difficult to listen to. And very often, the other complaint of kids, very often one kid is seen as the one who starts everything, when in fact there's a pattern going on that both kids might be participating in. So, these things that we experience in childhood can make us allergic to apologizing as adults.
I think that's a really important point. And I want to say that, so we need to work on teaching parents how to teach their children how to apologize at a very early age. Besides teaching the children, don't do those things, then you won't have to apologize. But there's,
I really have a very simple answer, and it's like 5 words. Actually, I didn't count the words. It's very difficult for parents to simply, say they ask for an apology, to simply say thank you for the apology. If there's more to discuss, save it for another conversation, so that it doesn't cancel out your child's apology or make them want to stick their fingers in their ears. So, that sounds very simple to say to parents, just say thank you for the apology and save your lecture about empathy or whatever for another conversation. It's actually very difficult for parents, and actually difficult for adults. Adults also need to learn to accept the olive branch with grace and generosity and say thank you for the apology, and then at a later time we can continue the conversation rather than thank you for the apology, but this, that,
Yeah, we're going to get to the buts in a minute too.
Right. So, yes, let's get to the buts.
Because I think they're important too. So is there an art to apology?
I don't think of it as an art. I like the phrase, the art of apology. It doesn't ring true. I think there is a lot to learn and a lot to practice, and that apology is profoundly difficult when it requires the non-defensive listening that we were touching on. But somehow calling it the art of apology, which was one of the suggested titles for my book that I vetoed, I don't know, it's very intellectual. It's sort of, I think, not where people live.
That's an interesting answer. In the same vein, we set out to apologize. We realize we wronged somebody. We set out to apologize. And then our best intentions go, as you say in the book, south. We screw up our attempt to apologize. So maybe we should discuss what not to do when we attempt to apologize.
Absolutely.
Go for it, girlfriend.
And right. I talk a lot about that in the book, about the best ways to muck up an apology, because if you know the most common ways that we muck it up, you can ideally decide not to do that. The most common way that we touched on is with the word but. More than anything, the hurt party wants to know that the apology is sincere. And the word but immediately undoes the sincerity of an apology and always offers some kind of rationalization or excuse. And we do it automatically, like, I'm really sorry I didn't call, but I was snowed under with work. Or, I'm really sorry I yelled at you, but you provoked me. Or, it doesn't matter. Here's the thing, Halli. It doesn't matter if what you say after the but is true. The but makes the apology false. So everyone should get their butts out of their apology. No pun intended.
I love that.
So that's the first way.
Right. Are there more that you want to talk about now?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Another one that is very common and it's a little more subtle is that we apologize for the other person's reaction rather than apologizing for our own specific behaviors. For example, it's not an apology to say, I'm sorry that you felt hurt by what I said, or I'm sorry that you were upset that I corrected your stories at the party. That's not an apology. There's no accountability there. The apology would be, I'm sorry I corrected your stories at the party. I was wrong. It was insensitive, and I won't do it again. So the number 2 way that people slither out of accountability and responsibility is to talk about the other person's feelings. I'm sorry if what I said made you upset. It's just not an apology. And the third biggest error is when we use the apology, which we do as a quick way out of the conversation, because we don't want to listen anymore. So, for example, something I hear commonly is that the husband might say, I'm using a big example now, he might say, I've apologized for the affair like 10 times now, so why do you keep bringing it up? Well, that is a way to silence the other person because it's difficult to listen. And as we were talking about earlier, listening is at the heart of the real apology. And when we're talking about a serious injury, the hurt party, it doesn't get healed in one conversation. It doesn't get healed in one, I'm really genuinely sorry. So using I'm sorry to silence the other person or a quick way out of an uncomfortable conversation, that also, I put that on the list of bad apologies. And obviously, as I said before, an apology is empty, no matter how artful, if we continue the behavior that we're apologizing for. So those are the major ways that we muck it up.
It struck me at the heart of all of this is that as we as humans are constantly doing wrongful acts, hurting others willfully or not. I mean, you don't have to do it willfully. Sometimes you do it by mistake. And should this be a discussion as to why we do that, why we hurt the ones we love before we move forward with the discussion? Is that necessary, or should we just assume that that's just the nature of humanity and we're going to do it, and that apology is our way of dealing with those hurts? Be you the one who does the hurting or you the one who's on the receivership of it? It's
a great question. And for the purpose of our conversation, I would say that we can simply assume that because we're imperfect, because we're reactive, because it is normal that when we're anxious or otherwise emotionally intense, that we're going to get into distance and blame. And obviously some people are more insensitive than others, but we all can be insensitive. So I would say let's take it as a given that this is so, has always been, and will always be for our species. And that the question is, how do we heal it? How do we repair the disconnection? And the apology is crucial.
Critical. So when is an apology necessary, and who makes that decision? And I'll tell you why I'm asking you this, because maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit because I do want to discuss this, but sometimes it's a manipulation too.
For
example, maybe you're having problems in a relationship, and somebody can turn to you and just kind of go, look, you just owe me an apology. that's another form of interaction that may not have to do with what the person actually did to them, but it may be a way of manipulating that person into being the bad guy when maybe they're not even so bad. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, the games people play, I go back to that. Maybe I'm not making myself clear. Am I not making myself clear? Because I think that apology can be in manipulation too, or the need, or the demand for apology can sometimes be a manipulation.
Well, demanding an apology, I mean, often when people demand an apology, it feels very genuine to them. But of course it can be off track. And and also, by the way, I would add that I don't think it's a good idea to demand an apology. It's just not useful. Adults don't like to be told how to think and feel and behave, and demanding an apology is no exception. So if I were in a position of someone telling me that I needed to apologize for some inappropriate, insensitive thing that I said, and my perspective was that I needed to say it, and I said it with kindness, and I have nothing to apologize for, then I would have to say, I see that differently, and let me tell you how I see it. So I don't think it's a good idea, when you're being falsely accused, I don't think it's a good idea to apologize for something you haven't said or done. I would never promote that. But I do think that sometimes we're being accused, someone wants an apology, and when we're listening to that angry, demanding person, our problem is we will automatically listen defensively. We're going to automatically listen for the errors, the inaccuracies, the exaggerations. We're automatically wanting to bring up the other person's crime sheet. And the challenge there is to try to really listen for what that angry person, for the essence of what they're trying to tell us. And if it's only 2% of what they're saying, but indeed, we did that 2%, there's a maturity and an integrity in being able to apologize for that piece of it. So it's very complicated because when we're being over-criticized, we're automatically going to shut down unless we have the intention to sort of open up our hearts and put the defensiveness on a shelf and listen for that essence of what the person really wants us to get.
So then I say to you, so is an apology always valuable?
Well, one can overdo it. I would say it's valuable when, in fact, it's due. But people, especially women, also over-apologize, which is not useful. And if some folks can't get the words, "I'm sorry," out of their mouth, other people apologize as if they went to Miss Manners apology finishing school, and the greatest risk for this being female. And this is problematic.
So we'll get back again to that. Yeah, right. I hear you. You were listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. My guest today is best-selling author and relationship guru, Harriet Lerner, out with the new must-read, Why Won't You Apologize? Healing Big Betrayals and Everyday Hurts. We'll be back in a minute. Stay with us. And we are back, and you are listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. Today I'm speaking with relationship guru and author of Why Won't You Apologize, Harriet Lerner. Thanks so much for tuning in. There are two people involved in an apology. Let's address it from either point of view. Can we do that? The person who was in need of the apology and the aggrieved party, so to speak. You want to talk about one and the other? Because I think that the approach is different, isn't it? And the needs are different, and how it's played would be different.
I can tell you a story.
Yeah.
I'll try to give you the very condensed Reader's Digest version. Because there really are two players. And very often when we want the apology, we may do the very thing that makes the apology least likely to come our way. And the story I want to tell, because it's just one of my most heartfelt, important stories as a therapist, is about a woman that I'll call Margot. And I saw her in therapy when she was a senior in high school, and she was this incredible person. And she was very vulnerable to deep depression. And when she was a senior in college, she made a suicide attempt when her boyfriend broke up with her. So it was the year from hell for Margot and for her wonderful family who loved her. So when she came back home over spring break, she went to see a teacher who had mentored her, who meant so much to Margot. He had, really been the most important person. And she went to visit with him, and somewhere in the conversation, he turned to her and said, "Margot, I need to tell you, I was very surprised to hear about your suicide attempt. In fact, I felt very disappointed. I didn't see you as the kind of person who would do such a thing." And then when she left his office, he tapped her in the back and, he said, "I sure hope that old strong Margot is in there somewhere." When I saw her, Halli, after this interaction, she felt totally flattened. She felt like a truck had hit her, that this man who was so important to her had shamed her. And she wanted an apology from him, right? Mm-hmm. Of course. And she didn't just want the words, "I'm sorry." She wanted what we all want. She wanted him to really get it, to understand that he had behaved like an asshole, to use her word. And she wanted him to feel as badly as he had made her feel. So she came to therapy with this long letter that she had written him, Halli. And the letter, had all the research about depression and suicide and a suggested reading list so that her teacher could educate himself. And, it was, very, very angry letter. It was 3 pages, single spaced. So now, if Margot's intention, and I think we all have something to learn from this story, if Margot's intention was to get the apology and help her teacher to really get it, I told her not to mail the letter. Everyone who gets me as a therapist or consultant gets me as an editor, and I always tell people, say it shorter. So with my help, she ended up writing him a short letter that it basically was 6 sentences long, and it said something like, "I'm writing this note because you've been such an important person in my life. I came back to see you needing your support. It hurt me to be told that I've disappointed you, as if I'm some kind of failure. And I need to tell you that," and she said, "and I left your office feeling like I was a smaller person who didn't meet your expectations. And maybe that's what you believe, but it didn't help me to hear it." And her last sentence was, "I also need to tell you that I don't believe that I am a smaller person because of my suicide attempt. Love, Margot." Now, this was an incredibly brave letter, because courage is not about blasting and blaming the other person and doing hit-and-run confrontations. Courage is in doing what Margot did in the second short note that was handwritten, no email. It was handwritten. And she was really inviting her teacher in this way to really sit with what he had done. because she wasn't revving up his defensiveness. So there is this constant interaction between the one who needs to apologize, the teacher, who did indeed apologize after this note, and the person who wants the apology. Because if Margot had sent that first note, which, by the way, is what we all do. We want an apology, so we overtalk it. We, blame the other person. We demand the apology. It's a dance. This is a interaction. So I love that story.
I love that story, and I love the fact that what it really punctuates is you need to say things in a way that people can hear you.
Exactly.
Exactly. That's the core. If they can't hear you, it doesn't matter how many times you say something. You need to say it in a way, and that's what I said. There has to be a way that we need to be taught how to facilitate, that art of speaking in a way or writing in a way that people can understand us. And I love that story, and I'm glad that you told it. Here's another one that I wanted to travel down a short road with you, and that is that we do identify with the hurt, with the aggrieved, as a general rule, correct? That's just human nature.
Exactly.
And what about that? How do we address the other side? Because I also think that it's the people who do the hurting are just as aggrieved in a way as the people who are hurt, because what they're putting out there may be because they've been hurt to begin with, and this is the way that they erroneously, poorly express themselves by action or whatever else.
I agree with you. The reality is that we have much more motivation to learn when we're the hurt party who wants the apology. It's really interesting. I went through a lot of titles for my book on healing big betrayals and everyday hurts. And I ended up with the title, Why Won't You Apologize? Why won't you apologize?
I got that.
Right, because that's what people want to read. If I called it The Art of Apologizing, or How to Apologize Better, no one would buy this book, even though they should, of course. So I cover both sides, but I called it Why Won't You Apologize? The fact is that our motivation to be heard, when we're the hurt party, when we're angry, our motivation to be heard is very, very strong. We really want the person to get it. We want the person to get what they've done. Our motivation to listen to someone who's angry at us, it's actually not a very high motivation. I can tell you a story. When I was at the Menninger Clinic in Topeka for decades, a colleague and I did these workshops called Talking Straight and Fighting Fair. And it was about getting through, getting through your partner's threshold of deafness. And it was for women. And women were breaking the doors down to come to our workshop. This was when I was collecting data for the Dance of Anger. So I decided to do a workshop on listening. So I actually had to cancel this workshop on the power of listening because 3 people signed up. And, again, this is human nature, that the world would be very different, really different, Halli, if our desire to understand the other person were as great as our wish to be understood. That's not how we're wired.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliantly said. And so true, so true, so true. And I think, we want to blame. We don't want to take our own responsibility, and we want to, and I what I think also that, and I really mean this, Harriet, it's pushing away the pain. That's why we do it.
Right.
Everything is about, I don't want to feel the hurt. So I'm going to blame you or you're going to blame me. And we do, that's the dance, right? Please, I don't want to hurt. Whatever. Stumble.
Right. We are, as we've been talking about, we we're a very defensive species.
So is there a way to get the apology that we deserve? Is there a key to that?
The Margot story should be everybody's model for how to maximize the chances of getting an apology. She begins with a positive. She says, I'm writing this note because you are a very important person in my life. She puts forth her feelings without criticism and blame. She didn't ask for or demand anything in the apology. She spoke her own truths, and she said it in 6 sentences. Say it shorter. Don't overload the circuits. So you can learn, and I certainly teach how to maximize the chances of getting the apology that you want. It's also important to understand that some people will never apologize, no matter how brilliantly and gracefully and generously you approach them. Some people will never apologize. And the bigger the harm, if the harm is one of neglect or abuse or just very, very serious actions or inactions, the bigger the crime, the less likely the apology will be forthcoming. So there's a vulnerability and a courage when people open up a conversation, say with a parent or someone about a painful thing, and they want the parent to really get it. We have no control over how that apology will be received. And that's a very important thing to understand.
So let me take it here, okay? This is interesting. Okay, we talked about women, the gender component, I call it. And that I think most women, we're the fixers. We over-apologize. We're going to fix it. We're going to take it on. That's conditioning. That maybe it's hormones. I don't know. It's all of that.
Yeah, conditioning. But men, and we've talked about that, and you talked about in the beginning of the show that men have come a long way, baby, on this issue of apology. Not all men. No, not all men.
Not all men. Forgive me, but I think Donald Trump needs to enter this conversation. I got to bring it up because something is changing here that I find very frightening that's going to affect all of us. Because the person who stands at the top of the world, as the leader of the free world, if you will, leader of the United States, their actions are what our children will be looking to as to our grandchildren, how they will become. And here is a guy who clearly hasn't a clue how to do apology. Right. And I don't think we've ever seen that quite the same way in a leader. Now, we've only had male leaders, unfortunately, but some of them are a little bit better if they are at least nuanced in an apology. They may not come out and say, look, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, but they'll come out and they'll do something that you kind of know, not this guy. This guy stands firm and tall, no matter how stupid he looks in all of this.
The issue for this guy, so I like avoiding his name. We'll call him this guy. The issue for this guy is not so simple that he can't apologize and he can't say, I'm really sorry. It's so much deeper because he doesn't take responsibility. He doesn't orient toward reality. He doesn't look at facts. He doesn't know how to problem solve in a way, that looks to the needs of all. And so the apology, his not saying, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, is sort of like the least of it. And the point you're making, though, is very important, that when leadership can't orient toward reality, take responsibility, when leadership just reflexively shames and blames, it trickles down. It trickles down to everybody underneath, which is all of us. And, the hopeful thing I can say is that we have so many good role models out there, and the rest of us as parents, as friends, as teachers, as leaders, we can be leaders in ways that model what you and I have been talking about, some position of apology with integrity, and so forth. So at least this guy, as serious as this guy is not our only role model, and that's why you and I, Halli, are having this conversation, and why you do your show.
But this is what concerns me. Yeah, why exactly? But here's what concerns me here. Okay, I said in the beginning about statistics on this, and that apology is not something that people have been doing as well, at least according to what I was reading, as they used to, 100 years ago or so. But here's the thing that concerns me, and that is, if you look at the reaction to people on this guy, if you will, not policy, because policy is something else. And it may be that policy right now is, for lack of I don't mean to be wise about this, but trumping character, if you will. But there are an awful lot of people who are making excuses for this. That concerns me more. People who I know, people who, up in the government, who I know better than to be accepting of this. And yet there seems, and voters who seem to be accepting of this. And I'm thinking, what's going on in American society? What's going on in world society? Listen, we have a show, this show, airs around the world, and we're in different stations. We're on, in a station in the UK. And I was talking to the owner of the station a couple of days ago, and he was telling me how people are just looking at this country like we've lost it. We have completely, because he looks so bizarre to them. Curious what your thought is there. Is society gone to hell in a handbasket?
I agree. I agree with what you're saying. And to just put it into somewhat different words, the problem is not this guy. The world is full of this guy. People like this guy. The world is full of people who, again, don't take responsibility, don't do the right thing, don't care about facts, don't care about people, etc. And the question is really, and this is exactly what you're saying, the real question is, how do we understand the popularity of a person like this? That's the real question. And I think, Halli, this has to be another show.
Well, we'll do that. Yeah, we'll do that. I think we should go there. But I think it needed to be addressed on some level.
Yes, I'm glad that you addressed it.
Within the confines of this conversation. Listen to me also. Is there a time when you say, we've got a lot of divorces going on. I know that the statistics are coming down. That's a good thing, but we do. Is there a time when you have to say an apology, that's met with resistance and people can't work these issues out? There is serial betrayal and somebody says, look, I've, turned my back on it this many times. I can't do that anymore. That you just say, okay, forget it. We got to let it go. They're not going to apologize. You're going to resist. Okay. And when is that moment? And is that something that's new to our culture, that we just say we've reached it and we can't find a way to amend these issues? And is that wrong?
Is what wrong?
Well, meaning you say, look, all the apologies in the world didn't solve the problem. We can't find a way to communicate healthfully between us. And so this relationship is going to end because you don't give me you see what I'm saying, where I'm going?
Right. And of course, some relationships do need to end, speaking of divorce, and some relationships end needlessly, and it's unfortunate that they've ended. I want all those people to read The Dance of Anger first, before they call a lawyer. Some relationships need to end, and I think relationships end better, that each person is on solid ground when a relationship ends. And, for example, you want to move forward, which you do, after a relationship ends, that you're on more solid ground if, in addition to all of the things that you're so rightfully angry about, so legitimately angry about, I think you're on more solid ground if you can also say, I've given it a lot of thought, and this is how I believe I've contributed as well, so that you can own and apologize or express regret, or at least name it, your own part. in the relationship not working. So, I believe that we always, Halli, we always stand on a higher platform of self-worth when we can accept responsibility for our part of the problem. It doesn't matter whether you see it as 3% or 98%, but we can do that without a hint of evasion or excuse-making or blaming. And that's very hard for people to do when they're divorcing because they're so angry.
Yeah.
So they're totally focused on what the other person has done and under-focused on whatever contribution they might have. So I would just say that it's always good to recognize your part, even if you're ending the relationship.
So you don't carry the baggage with you, for sure. And what's interesting to me, we are a blame-centric nation, in my opinion. And we're also one where I think empathy is not always right where it should be these days. That being said, and I don't know if you want to comment on my comment, or you want to let it go.
There's a lot wrong with these days. And,
yeah, I know, and I don't mean to be so negative.
More responsibility.
Yeah, and right, exactly.
Yourself.
So we're going to end, and I'm going to give you a few minutes, and I'm just going to say, have at it. And here's the word that I'm throwing out to you. I think it's a perfect way to end the conversation. Forgiveness.
Oh, you can't do this to me because I have a whole chapter in Why Won't You Apologize? It's
so
called
important.
You Have to Forgive and Other Lies That Hurt You. Because there is a tremendous myth in this culture that when you're dealing with a non-apologetic offender, and we all deal with non-apologetic offenders, the myth is that the only way to find peace of mind is to forgive. And that if you don't forgive, you're going to be forever stuck in angry bitterness, ruminations, and etc. And this simply isn't true. So I would say that first I would say that there is no one path to peace or healing, and that you can let go of the corrosive aspects of anger that keep you stuck without forgiving the non-repentant wrongdoer. And the other thing is that forgiveness, if you read the literature, it's talked about as an all or nothing thing, like being pregnant. Like either you embrace the offender or you exile him, or you forgive him or you don't. And that's not true. The truth is you can forgive the other person 95% or 2% or anywhere in between. And I have a case I mentioned in the book where the husband, they were in treatment with me because an affair that he was having came out in the open. They did great work on it. And at the, a couple of years after he'd ended the affair and he asked his wife if she forgave him, his wife said, "I forgive you 90%. And he said, "What do you mean by that?" And she said, "I do forgive you for the affair. That's the 90%. But I will never forgive you for sleeping with her in our bed." So she forgave, that was her 10% of non-forgiveness. And that's very healthy and human. And so there are a lot of myths about forgiving. And I would just say that you are not a less loving person. You're not a less spiritual person if there are certain things that you do not forgive when someone hasn't earned your forgiveness. And what is valuable, though, is to understand that all humans, all of us, are much better than the worst things that we've ever done. So I try not to let someone's bad behavior, I don't use the word forgiveness if the person has never cared about my feelings or oriented toward reality or said they were sorry. I don't use the word forgiveness, but I do try to not demonize them, to not let the bad thing they did obscure the fact that they're much larger and more complex than that, and there are things about them that I love. But for me, the word forgiveness is very much like the word respect. It can't be demanded or commanded or gifted for no reason at all. So I think my chapter on forgiveness is quite controversial, but very much reflects the research I've done.
I had a conversation with Kim Goldman, O.J. Simpson story, the sister of, and I felt bad after I had that conversation with her because I kind of went on her about her son, and that she said, I'll never forgive O.J. And she went through a whole litany about even the Jewish religion, which you both, and I think you are too, doesn't have the same kind of the story about forgiveness as Christianity. And I just railed at her. I said, is that what you want to teach your son? And now I feel like I need to send her this conversation in your book.
Well, some people would say, I'll never forgive my son, and that would mean that they cast their son forever out of their life and sort of erased every good quality of their son. And another person might say, I'll never forgive my son, and yet they also love their son and don't need to cut off the relationship, etc. So it's a really complex.
It's very complex, and there are a lot of people who say, well, I'll kind of forgive, but I won't forget. That's very female. Thank you, darling.
By the way,
what did you say?
It's good not to forget. It's good not to forget. There's really no reason to forget. But remembering is different than waking up 3 a.m. obsessing about the terrible things that your ex did to you. That's not good for anybody.
I've been speaking with one of the most loved and respected relationship experts, Harriet Lerner, whose new book is Why Won't You Apologize? Healing Big Betrayals and Everyday Hurts. For more information on Harriet Lerner and her book, visit harrietlerner.com. Up next on the Halli Casser-Jayne Show is a conversation with Frank Sesno, the award-winning American journalist, former CNN correspondent, anchor, and Washington bureau chief, and director of the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University, when he'll talk about his storied career as a journalist, the state of American politics, his new book, Ask More, the power of questions to open doors, uncover solutions, and spark change, and more. Don't miss it next Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern at HalliCasser-Jayne.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of Resec LLC. Associate producer, Suzanne Probst. Music by Tony Rosales Jazz. Visit HalliCasser-Jayne.com.